The scream tore from Katherine Zimmerman's throat before she was even fully conscious, her body jerking upright in the narrow bed as sweat plastered her nightgown to her skin. The dream again. Always the same dream. Fire licking at the walls of her family's farmhouse outside Independence, Missouri. Her father's face appearing in the window for just a moment before the smoke swallowed him whole, her mother's hand slipping from hers as the burning timber crashed between them. She pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to force the images away, but they clung to her like cobwebs. "Easy now," a deep voice rumbled from the doorway, and Katherine's eyes snapped open to find Samuel Crawford filling the frame, his massive shoulders nearly touching both sides. The mountain man had been watching over her for 3 nights now, ever since she had stumbled into his camp in the Texas Hill Country, half dead from exhaustion and dehydration after her stagecoach had been attacked by bandits. She had been the only survivor, left wandering through the wilderness until she had seen the smoke from his fire. Samuel moved into the small cabin with surprising grace for a man of his size, his buckskin shirt stretched tight across a chest that looked carved from granite. His dark hair hung past his shoulders, and several days' worth of beard shadowed his strong jaw. He carried a tin cup of water, which he held out to her with hands that could probably snap a man's neck, but were gentle as he waited for her trembling fingers to steady enough to take it. "The dream again?" he asked, his voice rough as creek gravel, but somehow soothing in the pre-dawn darkness. Katherine nodded, not trusting herself to speak yet. She sipped the water, letting it cool her parched throat. This was the 4th night in a row she had woken screaming, and each time Samuel had been there. She did not know how he heard her from wherever he slept in the cabin, but he always appeared within moments, solid and steady as the mountains he called home. "Want to talk about it?" Samuel settled himself on the floor beside her bed, his back against the wall. He had done this the previous nights too, staying with her until her breathing calmed and she could face the darkness again. "It is the same every time," Katherine whispered, staring down at the cup in her hands. "The fire, my parents. I'm 18 years old and I should be strong enough to move past this, but every night I see them dying all over again." Her voice broke on the last words. Samuel was quiet for a long moment, and when Katherine finally looked at him, she found his hazel eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Strength is not about forgetting," he said finally. "Strength is about surviving. And you have survived, Katherine. That took more courage than most folks have in their whole lives." "I ran away," she said bitterly. "After the fire, after the funeral, I could not bear to stay in Missouri any longer. Every corner of that town reminded me of them. So I bought passage on a stagecoach heading to Texas, thinking I could start fresh in San Angelo, where my aunt supposedly lives. And now I do not even know if she is still there, if she is even alive. I have nothing, Samuel. The bandits took everything." "You have yourself," Samuel said firmly, "and that is more than nothing." He shifted slightly, his muscular arms resting on his knees. "I know something about running from memories. Spent 10 years in these hills trying to outrun mine. Turns out, though, that memories can climb mountains just as well as men can." Katherine found herself curious despite her misery. "What were you running from?" Samuel's expression darkened, and for a moment she thought he would not answer. Then he sighed, a sound that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his chest. "War," he said simply. "I fought for Texas in '46 when we went to war with Mexico. Saw things no man should see, did things no man should have to do. When it was over, I could not go back to regular life. Could not sit in a parlor and make small talk like those years had not happened. So I came up here where it is just me and the wilderness." "You have been alone all this time?" Katherine asked softly. "Alone but not lonely," Samuel said. "Or at least, that is what I told myself. Truth is, I have gotten used to my own company. Forgot what it was like to have someone else around." He looked at her again, and something in his gaze made warmth bloom in Katherine's chest, despite the lingering chill from her nightmare. "These past few days, though, having you here, it has reminded me what I have been missing." Katherine felt heat rise to her cheeks and was grateful for the darkness that hid her blush. Samuel Crawford was unlike any man she had ever met. The young men back in Independence had been soft, concerned with commerce and propriety. Samuel was all hard muscle and raw capability, a man who had built this cabin with his own hands, who could track a deer through terrain that looked identical to her untrained eyes, who could start a fire in the rain and shoot a rattlesnake before it struck. But beneath that rough exterior, she had glimpsed a gentleness that made her heart ache. "I should let you sleep," Samuel said, starting to rise. "No," Katherine said quickly, then felt embarrassed by her urgency. "I mean, would you stay? Just a little longer? I do not think I can face the dark alone just yet." Samuel settled back down without hesitation. "I will stay as long as you need." They sat in comfortable silence as the first pale light of dawn began to creep through the cabin's single window. Katherine studied Samuel's profile in the growing light, taking in the strong line of his nose, the way his hair fell across his forehead, the breadth of his shoulders. He must have been 25 or 26, she guessed, though the hardness of his life made him seem older sometimes. "Why did you help me?" she asked suddenly. "When I stumbled into your camp, you could have sent me away. You did not know me. I could have been dangerous." Samuel's lips quirked in what might have been a smile. "You were about as dangerous as a half-drowned kitten," he said, "and I could not leave you out there, not when I knew you would die without help." He paused, then added more quietly, "And maybe I was tired of being alone. Maybe you showing up was not just luck for you." Katherine's heart began to beat faster. She knew she should not read too much into his words, knew that gratitude and attraction were dangerous to confuse, but she could not help the flutter of hope that rose in her chest. Samuel had been unfailingly kind to her, but he had also maintained a careful distance, never touching her unless necessary, always sleeping somewhere else in the cabin while she took the bed. "Samuel," she began, not sure what she wanted to say but feeling like she needed to say something. He turned to look at her fully, and the expression on his face made her breath catch. There was longing there, and uncertainty, and something that looked almost like fear. "Katherine," he said, his voice rough, "I need to tell you something. These past few days, having you here, taking care of you, it has made me realize how empty my life has been, how much I have missed having someone to share things with. But you are planning to go to San Angelo to find your aunt and start your new life. And I'm just a mountain man who has forgotten how to live among regular folks, so I want you to know that whatever happens, however long you stay here, I will help you get to San Angelo safely. I will not keep you here out of selfishness, even if every part of me wants to." Katherine's throat tightened with emotion. She reached out and placed her hand over his, feeling the rough calluses, the strength in his fingers. "What if I do not want to leave?" she whispered. Samuel's eyes widened slightly. "Katherine, you do not know what you are saying. You have been through a terrible ordeal. You are grateful and maybe a little confused. Once you are healed and rested, you will want to return to civilization." "I am not confused," Katherine said with more firmness. "I know my own mind, Samuel. Yes, I have been through something terrible. Yes, I am still healing. But I also know that I feel safer with you than I have felt since before my parents died. I know that when you look at me, I feel seen in a way I never did back in Independence. And I know that the thought of leaving here, of leaving you, makes my chest ache worse than any nightmare." Samuel stared at her for a long moment, and she could see the war playing out across his features. Then, slowly, carefully, he lifted his free hand and cupped her cheek, his palm warm against her skin. "I am not a gentleman," he said quietly. "I am not refined or educated. I cannot give you fancy dresses or take you to fancy parties." "I do not want those things," Katherine said, leaning into his touch. "I want honesty and strength, and someone who sees me as more than just a pretty decoration. I want someone who will hold me through my nightmares and teach me how to survive in this wild country. I want you, Samuel." Something in Samuel's expression cracked, and then he was leaning forward, his lips finding hers in a kiss that was gentle despite the obvious restraint she could feel thrumming through his powerful frame. Katherine's eyes fluttered closed as she kissed him back, her free hand coming up to tangle in his long hair. The kiss deepened, and she felt Samuel's arm wrap around her waist, pulling her closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. "You have undone me, Katherine Zimmerman," he murmured, "completely and thoroughly undone me." Katherine smiled, feeling lighter than she had in months. Good, she said, because you have undone me right back. The sun was fully up now, golden light streaming through the window and painting everything in warm tones. Samuel reluctantly pulled back, though he kept her hand clasped in his. You should try to get some more sleep, he said. We can talk more when you wake up. But Katherine shook her head. I do not think I could sleep now if I tried. Will you teach me something instead? About living out here? Samuel's expression softened. What do you want to learn? Everything, Katherine said simply, and so began Katherine's education in frontier life. Over the following days and weeks, Samuel taught her how to identify edible plants, how to track animals by their prints and scat, how to read the weather in the clouds and the behavior of birds. He showed her how to shoot his rifle, standing behind her with his arms around her to steady her aim, his breath warm against her ear as he murmured instructions. He taught her to fish in the nearby creek, to preserve meat, to tan hides. Katherine proved to be an eager student, soaking up knowledge with an intensity that seemed to both please and amaze Samuel. She was not afraid of hard work or getting dirty. When Samuel showed her how to gut and clean a rabbit, she did not flinch or turn away. When they hiked to a distant meadow to gather wild herbs, she kept pace with him despite the grueling terrain. At night, she still had the nightmares, but they came less frequently now. And always, Samuel was there when she woke screaming, gathering her into his arms and holding her against his broad chest until her breathing calmed. Sometimes he would talk to her about inconsequential things until she relaxed. Sometimes he would sing old songs in a surprisingly melodious bass. Sometimes they would just sit together in silence, drawing comfort from each other's presence. During the days, they fell into an easy rhythm. Samuel would wake before dawn and start the fire, then gently rouse Katherine. They would eat breakfast together, usually whatever game Samuel had caught the previous day, along with pan bread and coffee. Then they would tackle whatever tasks the day required, working side by side. Katherine found herself watching Samuel as he worked, admiring the play of muscles beneath his shirt, the competent way his hands moved, the focused expression on his face. She was falling in love with him. She knew it with a certainty that should have frightened her, but instead felt as natural as breathing. Everything about Samuel drew her in, from his quiet strength to his unexpected gentleness, from his respect for the land to his fierce protectiveness toward her. She loved the way he explained things without condescension, the way he pushed her to challenge herself, but never beyond what she was ready for, the way he looked at her like she was something precious. One evening, about a month after she had stumbled into his camp, Katherine was helping Samuel prepare dinner when he suddenly set down the knife he was using and turned to her. Katherine, he said, his voice unusually serious, we need to talk about San Angelo. Katherine's heart sank. She had been dreading this conversation. What about it? You came to Texas to find your aunt, Samuel said, to start a new life. I have been selfish, keeping you here, but it is not right. You need to know if your aunt is still alive, if she can take you in. You need to give yourself a chance at the life you were planning. What if I do not want that life anymore? Katherine asked, setting down her own knife. What if I want to stay here with you? Samuel's jaw tightened. You say that now, but what about in a year, 2 years? What if you wake up one day and realize you have given up everything to be with a man who lives like a hermit in the wilderness? I could not bear to see regret in your eyes, Katherine. Katherine moved to stand directly in front of him, tilting her head back to meet his gaze. Samuel Crawford, do you love me? The directness of the question clearly startled him. His eyes widened, and she saw a flicker of panic cross his face. But then his expression softened, and he reached up to tuck a strand of her dark hair behind her ear. More than I thought I could love anyone, he said quietly. More than is probably wise. Then trust me when I say I know my own heart, Katherine said firmly. I love you too, Samuel. And yes, maybe I will miss some things about civilization. Maybe there will be days when I long for a real bath or fresh bread from a bakery or a soft bed, but I would miss you more. I would miss this life we are building together. I would miss waking up every morning knowing I am exactly where I am supposed to be. Samuel's hands came up to frame her face, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones. You are sure? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. I have never been more sure of anything, Katherine said. Samuel kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, and Katherine melted against him, her arms wrapping around his neck. When they finally broke apart, Samuel rested his forehead against hers, his breathing ragged. "I still think we should go to San Angelo," he said. "Not to leave you there, but so you can find out what happened to your aunt, so you can make a real choice with all the information, and so we can get married proper, with a preacher and witnesses." Catherine's breath caught. "Married?" Samuel pulled back just enough to look at her, and she saw vulnerability in his eyes. "If you will have me. I know I am not much of a catch, but I swear I will spend every day trying to make you happy. I will build you a bigger cabin with real windows and a proper floor. I will take you into town whenever you want. I will hold you through every nightmare and every storm. I will love you until my last breath and beyond." Tears sprang to Catherine's eyes. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, I will marry you, Samuel. I will be honored to be your wife." Samuel let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and pulled her tight against him, lifting her off her feet in a crushing embrace. Katherine clung to him, laughing and crying at the same time, overwhelmed by the intensity of her feelings. They decided to leave for San Angelo the following week. Samuel spent the intervening days preparing for the journey, checking his weapons and his horse, packing supplies. Katherine helped as much as she could, her excitement tempered by nervousness about what they might find. She had not heard from her aunt in over a year. For all she knew, the woman had moved away or passed on. The night before they were set to leave, Katherine lay in bed listening to the sounds of the wilderness beyond the cabin walls. She had grown accustomed to them now, the rustling of small animals, the hoot of an owl, the whisper of wind through the pines. This place had become home to her in a way Independence never truly had. As if summoning them with her thoughts, the nightmare came that night. But this time, it was different. The fire still raged, her parents still died, but when she turned away from the burning house, Samuel was there. Not in the past, but in the present, reaching through the smoke and flames to pull her into his arms, his solid presence anchoring her. She woke without screaming, her heart racing, but her panic muted. Samuel was already there beside the bed, just as he always was, his brow creased with concern. "Katherine." "I'm all right," she said, and realized she meant it. "The dream was different this time. You were in it." Samuel's expression softened. "Is that a good thing?" "Yes," Katherine said, reaching for his hand, "because even in my worst memories, I know you are here in my present. You have given me something to hold on to, Samuel. You have given me hope." Samuel climbed onto the bed beside her, fully clothed but gathering her into his arms anyway. They had maintained propriety despite their engagement, but Katherine needed his closeness tonight. She pressed her face against his chest, breathing in his scent of wood smoke and pine and something uniquely him. "I am glad," Samuel murmured into her hair, "because you have given me the same thing. Before you came, I was just existing. Now, I am living again." They lay together until dawn, talking quietly about their plans, their hopes, their fears. By the time the sun rose, Katherine felt ready to face whatever San Angelo might bring. The journey to San Angelo took 3 days. Samuel owned only one horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Chester, so Katherine rode while Samuel walked alongside. She offered repeatedly to trade places, but Samuel refused with a stubbornness she was beginning to recognize as characteristic. "I have walked these hills for 10 years, he said. "A few days more will not hurt me." They traveled at a steady pace, stopping frequently to rest and water the horse. Samuel pointed out landmarks and features of the terrain, continuing Katherine's education. At night, they made camp in sheltered spots, and Samuel showed her how to construct a proper campfire, how to arrange their sleeping area for maximum safety and comfort. Katherine found she loved traveling with Samuel. She loved watching him move through the wilderness with such confidence and grace, loved the way he was always alert to their surroundings without seeming anxious. She loved their conversations around the campfire, the way Samuel opened up more with each passing day, sharing stories from his childhood in Kentucky, from his years in the war, from his time in the mountains. On the 3rd morning, they crested a rise and saw San Angelo spread out in the valley below. It was larger than Katherine had expected, a proper town with multiple streets, a church steeple rising above the other buildings. Her stomach clenched with nervousness. Samuel must have sensed her anxiety because he reached up and squeezed her hand where it rested on the saddle horn. Whatever we find, we face it together, he said firmly. They rode into town just after noon. San Angelo bustled with activity, people moving along the wooden sidewalks, horses and wagons filling the street. Katherine felt overwhelmed after weeks of solitude, and she found herself gripping Samuel's shoulder where he walked beside Chester. Samuel glanced up at her. "Where did your aunt live?" "On Pecan Street, I think," Katherine said, trying to remember details from letters she had received years ago. She ran a boarding house. They asked directions from a woman sweeping the steps of a general store who pointed them toward the east side of town. As they made their way through San Angelo's streets, Katherine noticed the looks they attracted. Samuel's buckskin clothes and long hair marked him as a mountain man, while her own dress was worn and trail-stained. She lifted her chin, refusing to be embarrassed. These people knew nothing about her, about what she had survived. Pecan Street was lined with modest houses, most of them well-maintained. Samuel stopped in front of a 2-story building with a sign that read, "Zimmerman's Boarding House." Katherine's heart leapt. Her aunt was still here. Samuel helped her dismount, and Katherine smoothed her skirts with trembling hands. "Do I look presentable?" she asked. Samuel smiled, and the warmth in his eyes made her breath catch. "You look beautiful," he said simply. Together they climbed the steps to the front door. Katherine knocked, her heart pounding. After a moment, the door opened to reveal a woman in her 50s with graying hair and sharp blue eyes. She looked Katherine up and down, her expression puzzled. "Can I help you?" "Aunt Marjorie?" Katherine said hesitantly. "It is Katherine, Katherine Zimmerman, your niece from Missouri." The woman's eyes widened in shock. "Katherine, good Lord, child, I heard about the fire. I wrote to you, but the letter came back. I thought perhaps you had perished too." She pulled Katherine into a fierce embrace. Come in, and your husband?" Katherine felt her cheeks heat. "Not my husband yet, but my intended. This is Samuel Crawford. He saved my life." Marjorie's expression grew even more interested as she took in Samuel's impressive frame. "Well, Mr. Crawford, any man who saved my niece is welcome in my home. Please, both of you, come inside." The boarding house was clean and comfortable, smelling of fresh bread and lavender. Marjorie led them to a sitting room and insisted on serving tea and cake while Katherine explained everything that had happened since the fire. Samuel remained quiet for most of the conversation, but Katherine felt his steady presence beside her, anchoring her. When Katherine finished, Marjorie sat back in her chair, shaking her head. "You have been through so much, child. I am so sorry. If I had known you were coming, I would have tried to find you." "It worked out," Katherine said, glancing at Samuel, "better than I could have imagined, actually." Marjorie's sharp eyes missed nothing. She looked between Katherine and Samuel, and a small smile curved her lips. "I can see that. So you two are planning to marry?" "If we can find a preacher," Samuel said. It was the first time he had spoken since they entered the house, and his deep voice seemed to fill the room. "I want to do this right by Katherine. The Reverend at the Methodist Church will do it," Marjorie said promptly. "Reverend Thompson. He's a good man. I can send word if you like." Over the next several days, Marjorie took charge of the wedding preparations with an efficiency that left Katherine slightly dazed. She insisted on giving Katherine one of her own good dresses, a dark blue silk that had to be taken in but fit well enough. She arranged for the ceremony to take place on Sunday afternoon, giving Samuel time to get a haircut and buy a proper suit at the general store. Katherine watched Samuel eye the suit with deep suspicion. "I look like a fool," he muttered, tugging at the collar. "You look handsome," Katherine assured him, though privately she agreed he looked more comfortable in buckskin. Still, the suit emphasized his broad shoulders and narrow waist, and when he stood waiting for her at the front of the church on their wedding day, Katherine thought her heart might burst with love. The ceremony was simple, attended by Marjorie and a few of her boarding house residents who had befriended Katherine over the past week. Katherine spoke her vows in a clear voice, meaning every word. When Samuel slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, his own voice was rough with emotion. "I promise to protect you, cherish you, and love you for all of my days," he said, his hazel eyes locked on hers. "You have given me a reason to live again, Katherine. I will spend my life trying to be worthy of that gift." Katherine felt tears slip down her cheeks. "You already are worthy," she whispered. "You are the best man I have ever known." When Reverend Thompson pronounced them husband and wife, Samuel kissed her with a tenderness that made the small congregation sigh. Katherine clung to him, overwhelmed by the reality that this incredible man was now her husband. Marjorie hosted a small reception at the boarding house, complete with roast chicken and a cake she had baked specially. As Katherine moved through the gathering, Samuel never far from her side, she felt a contentment she had not experienced since before her parents' death. She had found a new family, a new home, a new purpose. That night, in the room Marjorie had prepared for them, Samuel held Katherine close. They had consummated their marriage with a gentleness and passion that left Katherine trembling, and now they lay tangled together, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Are you happy?" Samuel asked quietly, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "Happier than I knew I could be," Katherine said honestly. She tilted her head to look up at him. "Are you? I know this is not what you are used to being in town." Samuel considered this, his expression thoughtful in the lamplight. "I will admit I am eager to return to the mountains," he said, "but having you by my side makes anywhere feel right." He paused, then added, "Your aunt offered to let us stay here, you know, to help her run the boarding house." Katherine had suspected as much. Marjorie had hinted at it more than once over the past week. "I know," she said, "but that's not what you want, is it?" "No," Samuel admitted, "but if it is what you want, if you would rather stay in civilization, I will do it. I meant what I said in my vows. Your happiness comes first." Katherine pushed herself up on one elbow, looking down at her husband. "My happiness is with you," she said firmly, "in the mountains, in the cabin you built with your own hands. That is where I want to be, Samuel. That is home." Relief flooded Samuel's face, and he pulled her down for a deep kiss. "Then that is where we will go," he murmured against her lips, "as soon as you are ready." They stayed in San Angelo for 2 more weeks, partly to spend time with Marjorie, and partly because Samuel wanted to purchase supplies they would need. He bought Katherine a proper riding outfit, sturdy boots, a warm coat. He bought tools and lumber, talking about improvements he wanted to make to the cabin. He bought seeds for a garden Katherine wanted to plant, books to read during the long winter evenings, fabric for curtains and quilts. Katherine watched him spend his carefully saved money without complaint, and her love for him deepened even further. When she protested that he was buying too much, Samuel just shook his head. "I want you to have everything you need to be comfortable," he said stubbornly. "I know the cabin is rough, but I can make it better." "The cabin is perfect because you are there," Katherine said, taking his hand. "But I appreciate everything you are doing." Finally, on a clear morning in early September of 1857, they said goodbye to Marjorie and began the journey back to the mountains. This time, Samuel had purchased a second horse, a gentle mare named Daisy, so they could ride side by side. As San Angelo disappeared behind them, Katherine felt no regret. She was going home. The journey back took 4 days because they traveled at a more leisurely pace, stopping to explore interesting landmarks and enjoy each other's company. At night, they made love under the stars, and Katherine marveled at how natural it felt to be with Samuel this way, how perfectly their bodies fit together. When they finally reached the cabin, Katherine slid from Daisy's back and looked around with fresh eyes. The clearing seemed smaller than she remembered, the cabin more rustic, but it was theirs, a place they had claimed together. Over the following weeks, they fell into a new routine as husband and wife. Samuel began the improvements he had promised, enlarging the window and adding a second one for cross-ventilation, building a proper door frame, constructing shelves and a larger table. Katherine planted a small garden, tended their growing store of preserved food, and continued learning the skills she would need to thrive in this environment. The nightmares came less frequently now, sometimes weeks passing between episodes. When they did strike, Samuel was always there, gathering her into his arms and murmuring soothing words until she calmed. Katherine found that talking about her parents helped, sharing memories of happier times, and Samuel was an attentive listener. As autumn painted the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Katherine realized she had not thought about her old life in Missouri for days at a time. This was her life now, and she embraced it fully. She learned to cook over an open fire, to mend buckskin clothing, to preserve meat for the winter. Samuel taught her to shoot well enough that she could bring down small game, and her pride in her growing competence matched his obvious pleasure in her progress. One evening in late October, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Samuel reached over and took Catherine's hand. "I have been thinking," he said slowly, "about the future, about what our life might look like." Katherine squeezed his fingers encouragingly. "What have you been thinking?" "I want children with you," Samuel said, his eyes meeting hers. "I want to fill this cabin with the sound of young ones laughing. I want to teach our sons to hunt and track, to teach our daughters to be strong and capable like their mother. But I also want to make sure you are ready for that. I know you are still healing from everything you have been through." Katherine felt warmth bloom in her chest. She had been thinking about children too, imagining what their babies might look like, whether they would have Samuel's hazel eyes or her dark brown ones. "I am ready," she said softly. "I want a family with you, Samuel. I want to build something lasting here." Samuel's expression transformed with joy, and he pulled her onto his lap, kissing her deeply. "You have made me the happiest man alive," he murmured against her lips. Winter came to the mountains with a vengeance that year. Snow piled high around the cabin, and temperatures dropped so low that ice formed on the inside of the windows. But Katherine found she did not mind. The cabin was snug and warm, their supplies were plentiful, and she had Samuel. They spent long evenings by the fire, talking and reading, making love and planning for the future. It was during one of those frozen February nights that Katherine realized her monthly courses had not come. She lay awake beside Samuel, one hand pressed to her still flat stomach, wondering if she was imagining things. But as another week passed with no sign, she became increasingly certain. She chose to tell Samuel on a rare sunny afternoon when the temperature had risen enough for them to venture outside. They were walking through the snow-covered forest, and Katherine stopped in a small clearing, the sunlight turning the world into a dazzling display of white and gold. "Samuel," she said, and something in her voice made him turn to her immediately, concern creasing his brow. "What is it? Are you all right?" Katherine smiled, unable to contain her joy any longer. "I am more than all right. Samuel, I am with child. We are going to have a baby." For a moment Samuel just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then he let out a whoop of pure happiness that echoed through the trees, and he scooped her up and spun her around, laughing. When he set her down, his eyes were suspiciously bright. "A baby," he said wonderingly, kneeling in the snow and pressing his ear to her stomach as if he might hear something. "Our baby." Katherine ran her fingers through his hair, her heart so full she thought it might overflow. "Our baby," she confirmed. Samuel became even more protective after that, if such a thing were possible. He insisted Katherine rest more, avoided letting her do anything too strenuous, hovered constantly. Katherine found it equal parts touching and exasperating. "Samuel, I am pregnant, not an invalid," she said one day when he tried to stop her from carrying water from the creek. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I will not break." "I know," Samuel said, looking chagrined. "I just want to take care of you, both of you." Katherine softened, seeing the real fear in his eyes. "I know you do, and I love you for it. But I need to stay strong and active. The midwife back in Independence always said that women who kept moving had easier births." Samuel reluctantly agreed to let her maintain her normal activities, though he still watched her like a hawk. As spring arrived and Katherine's belly began to swell with their growing child, they made preparations. Samuel built a cradle from smooth pine, carving intricate designs into the wood. Katherine sewed tiny clothes, marveling at how small they were. They talked endlessly about names, about what kind of parents they wanted to be, about the life they would give their child. In early summer, with wildflowers carpeting the meadows and the air warm and sweet, Katherine went into labor. Samuel had ridden to the nearest settlement 2 weeks earlier and brought back a midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Henderson, who had agreed to stay with them until the baby came. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Katherine had never experienced such pain, and there were moments when she wondered if she would survive it. But Samuel never left her side, holding her hand, wiping her brow, whispering encouragement even as she squeezed his fingers hard enough to leave bruises. "You are the strongest woman I know," he said fiercely when Katherine sobbed that she could not do it anymore. "You survived fire and loss and the wilderness itself. You can do this, Katherine. Our baby needs you. I need you. Finally, as the sun began to set on the second day, with one last tremendous effort, Katherine pushed their child into the world. The baby's cry filled the cabin, strong and indignant, and Mrs. Henderson laughed. "It is a boy," she announced, wrapping the infant in a clean cloth. "A healthy, beautiful boy." Samuel's face was wet with tears as Mrs. Henderson placed the baby in his arms. He stared down at his son with an expression of such awe and love that Katherine felt her own tears spill over. "He is perfect," Samuel whispered. "Katherine, look. We made this perfect little person." Mrs. Henderson helped Katherine deliver the afterbirth and get cleaned up, then placed the baby in her arms. Katherine looked down at her son's scrunched red face, his tiny fists waving in the air, and felt love slam into her with the force of a physical blow. This was their child, hers and Samuel's, a new life they had created together. "What should we name him?" Samuel asked, settling carefully on the bed beside her, one arm around her shoulders. They had discussed many names over the past months, but looking at their son now, Katherine knew exactly what felt right. "Thomas," she said. "Thomas Crawford, after my father." Samuel's expression softened. "I think that is perfect. Hello, Thomas. Welcome to the world, little one." The next months passed in a blur of sleepless nights and new discoveries. Thomas proved to be a healthy baby with a strong pair of lungs, and both Samuel and Katherine fell completely in love with him. Samuel was a devoted father, surprising Katherine with his gentleness as he handled their tiny son. He would pace the cabin for hours with Thomas against his broad chest, singing old songs in his deep voice until the baby fell asleep. Katherine watched her husband with their child and fell in love with him all over again. This fierce mountain man who could kill a bear with his bare hands was reduced to absolute softness by an infant's grip on his finger. When Thomas smiled for the first time, Samuel nearly wept with joy. As Thomas grew from infant to toddler, the cabin rang with his laughter. He was a curious, active child, always getting into things, exploring every corner of their small home and the clearing beyond. Samuel built a fence around the perimeter to keep him safe, and they took turns watching him as he played. When Thomas was 2 years old, Katherine realized she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, her body knowing what to expect. Samuel was just as protective but had learned to give her more space. Their second child, a daughter they named Sarah, was born on a snowy December morning, arriving so quickly that Mrs. Henderson barely made it in time. Sarah was different from Thomas from the start, calmer and more observant where her brother was energetic and bold. She had Samuel's hazel eyes and Katherine's dark hair, and both her parents were utterly besotted with her. Thomas, now a sturdy 2-year-old, was fascinated by his baby sister and constantly wanted to help care for her. The cabin that had once housed only Samuel now rang with the sounds of family, with children's laughter and crying, with Katherine singing lullabies and Samuel telling stories. They had to expand twice more to accommodate their growing family, and Samuel talked about eventually building a whole new house, something with multiple rooms and a proper porch. Katherine's nightmares had stopped almost entirely by then. It had been over a year since she had last woken screaming from the dream of fire and loss. When she did occasionally have bad dreams, they were different now, more manageable. And Samuel was always there, just as he had been from the beginning, holding her and reminding her that she was safe. One evening when Thomas was 5 and Sarah was 3, Katherine stood in the doorway of the cabin watching Samuel play with the children in the clearing. He had Thomas on his shoulders while Sarah clung to his leg, both children shrieking with laughter as Samuel pretended to be a bear. The setting sun painted everything in gold, and Katherine felt a peace so profound it brought tears to her eyes. This was everything she had never known she wanted. Not the life of refinement and society she might have had in Missouri, but this wild, beautiful existence in the mountains with the man she loved and the children they had created together. She thought of her parents, wished they could have met Samuel and their grandchildren, but she no longer felt the crushing grief that had once defined her. Samuel looked up and caught her watching. He said something to the children, then crossed the clearing to where she stood, his expression soft. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, pulling her into his arms. Katherine leaned against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I'm thinking about how lucky I am," she said. How different my life would be if I had not stumbled into your camp that day. You saved me, Samuel. In every way a person can be saved." Samuel kissed the top of her head. "You saved me too," he said quietly. "I did not even know how lost I was until you found me. You gave me purpose, Katherine. You gave me a reason to come down from the mountain and live again." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching their children play, the mountains rising around them in purple majesty. Katherine knew that life would not always be easy. There would be hard winters and failed crops, illness and injury, and all the challenges that came with frontier life. But she also knew that she and Samuel would face those challenges together, their love and commitment strong enough to weather any storm. That night, after the children were asleep in their small room, Samuel and Katherine lay together in their bed, talking quietly about the future. They discussed expanding their garden, maybe getting chickens, teaching Thomas to ride properly. Samuel mentioned that he had been thinking about taking the family to San Angelo for a visit, letting the children meet their great-aunt Marjorie. "I think they would love that," Katherine said, "and I would like to see Marjorie again. It has been years." "We could make it a regular thing," Samuel suggested. "Go once a year or so, keep those connections. I do not want the children to grow up completely isolated. They should know there's a wider world out there, even if we choose to live here." Katherine smiled, touched by his thoughtfulness. Samuel had come so far from the solitary mountain man she had first met, the one who had retreated from society to nurse his wounds. He was still most comfortable in the wilderness, still preferred solitude over crowds. But he had learned to balance his need for isolation with the needs of his family. "You are a good father," Katherine said, reaching up to stroke his bearded cheek. "And a good husband. I hope you know that." Samuel captured her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "I am those things because you made me want to be," he said. "Before you, I was just surviving. Now I am living." They made love slowly, tenderly, years of intimacy allowing them to know exactly how to please each other. Afterwards, Katherine lay in Samuel's arms and thought about how far she had come. The girl who had fled Missouri in grief and desperation had become a woman who knew her own strength, who had built a life in the wilderness, who had found love in the most unexpected place. The years continued to pass in a rhythm of seasons. Thomas grew tall and strong like his father, learning to hunt and track and survive in the mountains. Sarah proved to be gentle but determined, with a gift for healing that led Samuel to teach her about medicinal plants. When Thomas was 8 and Sarah was 6, Katherine gave birth to twin boys, Matthew and Mark, who kept the entire family on their toes with their mischief and energy. The cabin was bursting at the seams, so Samuel finally made good on his promise to build a proper house. It took 2 years, working mostly in the spring and summer when the weather permitted, but eventually a sturdy 2-story structure stood in an expanded clearing. It had 4 bedrooms, a real kitchen with a cast-iron stove that Samuel had hauled up from San Angelo, and a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Katherine cried when Samuel carried her over the threshold of the finished house, remembering the rough cabin where she had first found refuge, where she had fallen in love, where she had given birth to Thomas. That cabin still stood, and they used it for storage now, but this house was a symbol of everything they had built together. They made good on their plan to visit San Angelo regularly, and the children came to love their trips to town. Marjorie doted on them, always having treats and stories ready. She had aged considerably but remained sharp and energetic, and she never failed to tell Katherine how proud she was of the life her niece had built. On one visit, when Katherine was 35 and Samuel 39, Marjorie pulled Katherine aside. "You know, when you first showed up with that wild mountain man, I was not sure about him," she said with a smile. "But he has proved me wrong in every way. That man loves you and those children with everything he has. You chose well, Katherine." Katherine looked across the room to where Samuel was showing the twins how to properly shake hands with Reverend Thompson, his patience evident even as the boys giggled and squirmed. "I did," she agreed softly. "Though honestly, Marjorie, I think fate chose for me. If that stagecoach had not been attacked, if I had not wandered in exactly the right direction, if Samuel had not been camping in exactly that spot, so many things had to align perfectly." "Maybe that's what people mean when they talk about meant to be," Marjorie said thoughtfully. Not that there is only one person for everyone, but that sometimes the universe conspires to put the right people together at the right time. That night, lying in the boarding house's guest room with Samuel beside her and the children asleep in the next room, Katherine thought about Marjorie's words. She believed in choice, in free will, in the decisions people made to love and commit and persevere. But she also believed that something larger had been at work the day she stumbled into Samuel's camp, something that had seen two broken people and known they could heal each other. The children continued to grow. Thomas, at 18, was the spitting image of his father, tall and broad-shouldered, with long dark hair and hazel eyes that could spot a deer at 100 yards. He had Samuel's quiet competence and Katherine's fierce heart, and he talked about eventually starting his own homestead in the mountains, though not too far from his parents. Sarah, at 16, had blossomed into a beautiful young woman, with a steady stream of would-be suitors whenever they visited San Angelo. But she showed no interest in any of them, instead focusing on her studies of healing. Mrs. Henderson had taken her on as an unofficial apprentice, teaching her midwifery and herbal medicine. The twins, now 10, were still as energetic as ever, constantly exploring and getting into adventures that left Katherine's heart in her throat, and Samuel alternately amused and exasperated. They were bright boys, curious about everything, and Samuel had started teaching them to read and write, using the books Katherine had brought from her previous life. Life was full and rich and sometimes chaotic, but Katherine would not have changed any of it. She had created something lasting here in these mountains, a legacy that would continue long after she was gone. She had children who were strong and capable, who knew how to survive but also how to love, who understood the value of both solitude and community. On her 40th birthday, Samuel surprised her by taking her on an overnight trip, just the two of them. They left the children in Thomas's capable care and rode out to a remote valley Samuel had discovered years ago, a place of stunning beauty where wildflowers grew thick as carpet and a waterfall tumbled into a crystal-clear pool. They made camp beneath the stars, and as they lay together in their bedroll, Samuel pulled Katherine close. 20 years, he said wonderingly. 20 years since you walked into my life and changed everything. Not quite 20, Katherine said with a laugh. We have been married 18 years. I'm counting from the day we met, Samuel said, because that was when my real life began. He propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at her in the moonlight. Katherine Crawford, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. You gave me purpose and love and a family I never thought I would have. You made me better than I was. I want you to know that I fall in love with you all over again every single day. Katherine felt tears prick her eyes. After all these years, Samuel could still make her cry with his words. I love you too, she whispered, more than I have words to express. You held me through my nightmares when I was broken. You taught me to be strong. You gave me a life beyond anything I imagined. You are my home, Samuel. You always will be. They made love under the stars with a passion undimmed by years and familiarity. And Katherine thought about the long road that had led them to this moment. The fire that had taken her parents, the attack that had left her wandering lost, the nightmare that had haunted her for so long. All of it had been terrible, but it had also been necessary, bringing her to exactly where she needed to be. She had not had the nightmare in years now. Sometimes she dreamed of her parents, but they were good dreams, memories of happy times. The trauma had not disappeared completely, would never disappear completely, but it no longer defined her. She had built a life so full of love and purpose that the pain was just one small part of her story, not the whole narrative. As they rode back to the house the next day, Katherine looked at Samuel riding beside her on Chester, still strong and vital at 39, his hair now streaked with silver. She thought about their children waiting at home, about the life they had built together in this wild place. She thought about how far they had both come from the broken people they had been when they met. Samuel, she said, and he turned to look at her. Thank you. For what? He asked, clearly puzzled. For everything, Katherine said simply. For saving my life. For loving me. For holding me through every nightmare. For giving me a reason to keep going when I wanted to give up. For being exactly who you are. Samuel's expression softened, and he reached across the space between their horses to take her hand. Katherine, I should be thanking you. You saved me just as much as I saved you, maybe more. They rode the rest of the way home hand in hand, and when the house came into view, the children running out to greet them, Katherine felt a contentment so complete it was almost painful. This was everything. This was enough. This was more than enough. The years continued their inexorable march. The children grew into adults. Thomas married a girl from San Angelo, a rancher's daughter named Mary, and built his homestead in a valley 5 miles from his parents' house. Sarah eventually fell in love with a young doctor who had come to San Angelo to establish a practice, and they married when she was 22. The twins, inseparable as always, decided to go into business together, running a freight operation between San Angelo and other towns in the region. Samuel and Katherine became grandparents, and Samuel proved to be just as devoted to his grandchildren as he had been to his children. Katherine often found him on the porch with a grandchild on each knee, telling the old stories, singing the old songs. He moved a bit slower now, his hair completely white, but he was still strong, still capable, still the man she had fallen in love with. They were in their 60s when Samuel fell ill one winter. It started as a cough that would not go away, then developed into a fever. Katherine nursed him with help from Sarah and her doctor husband, but they all knew it was serious. "Pneumonia," Sarah said quietly, her face grave. In a man of Samuel's age, it could be fatal. Katherine refused to accept that. She sat by Samuel's bedside, day and night, forcing him to drink broth, bathing him with cool water when the fever raged, holding his hand and talking to him even when he was barely conscious. She told him stories of their life together, reminded him of all the reasons he had to fight, to live. "You held me through my nightmares," she whispered one night when his breathing was particularly labored. "Now I am holding you through yours. You do not get to leave me, Samuel Crawford. We have a deal. You promise to love me until your last breath and beyond. I am not ready for that breath to come yet. Do you hear me? I am not ready." Whether it was her nursing, Sarah's medical knowledge, or pure stubbornness, Samuel slowly began to improve. The fever broke, the cough eased, and color returned to his face. When he was finally strong enough to sit up and eat solid food, he looked at Katherine with eyes full of love and gratitude. "You saved my life," he said hoarsely. "Again," Katherine kissed his forehead. "We save each other," she corrected. "That is what we do. That is what we have always done." Samuel recovered fully, though the illness had aged him. He moved more carefully now, tired more easily. But his mind remained sharp, and his love for Katherine never wavered. They spent long afternoons on the porch, watching their grandchildren play, talking about their life together. "Do you have any regrets?" Samuel asked one day. "About choosing this life? About staying here instead of going back to civilization?" Katherine did not even have to think about her answer. "Not one single regret," she said firmly. "This life, with you, has been everything I ever wanted, even before I knew I wanted it. You gave me a family, Samuel. You gave me purpose. You gave me love. What more could anyone ask for?" Samuel smiled, that same warm smile that had been melting her heart for over 4 decades. "I love you, Katherine Crawford. More today than yesterday, more tomorrow than today." "I love you too," Katherine said, lacing her fingers through his, "forever and always." They were granted 20 more years together, years of watching their grandchildren grow, of welcoming great-grandchildren, of continuing to build and strengthen the legacy they had created. Samuel remained vital well into his 80s, still able to ride and hunt, though he let Thomas do most of the heavy work now. Katherine's hair turned white, her hands developed arthritis, but she remained active tending her garden, cooking for the constant stream of family members who visited. Samuel passed away peacefully in his sleep one spring night, 3 months after his 86th birthday. Katherine woke to find him still and cold beside her, his face relaxed and peaceful. She did not scream, she did not panic. She simply held his hand and cried quiet tears, grieving the loss of her love, her partner, her best friend. The funeral drew family from all over Texas. All 4 of their children came with their spouses and children. Grandchildren and great-grandchildren filled the house and spilled out onto the porch and yard. They celebrated Samuel's life with stories and laughter and tears, remembering the man who had built all of this, who had loved so fiercely and protected so completely. Katherine stood at his grave, looking out over the mountains he had loved. and she thought about the young woman she had been when she first met him, broken, lost, haunted by nightmares. Samuel had held her through every single one of those nightmares until they finally stopped. He had given her the strength to heal, to love, to build a life worth living. "Thank you," she whispered to the mountains, to the wind, to whatever remained of Samuel's spirit. "Thank you for every moment. I will love you until my last breath and beyond, just as you promised me. And when that breath comes, I will find you again. I know you will be waiting." Katherine lived for 5 more years after Samuel's death, surrounded by her family, still active and engaged despite her age. She spent her days tending her garden, playing with her great-grandchildren, and writing down the story of her life with Samuel, so that future generations would know where they came from. She passed away on a summer evening, sitting on the porch of the house Samuel had built, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold. Thomas found her there, a peaceful smile on her face, her eyes closed. In her lap was a photograph from their 50th wedding anniversary. Samuel's arm around her shoulders, both of them beaming at the camera. They buried Katherine beside Samuel, their graves overlooking the valley where they had spent their lives. And if you visit that place today, you can still see the house they built, now maintained by their descendants as a family homestead. You can see the old cabin where Katherine first found refuge, preserved as a reminder of where it all began. You can see the garden Katherine planted, the porch where they watched their children grow, the mountains that Samuel loved. But more than that, you can feel the love that still lingers in that place, a love so strong it survived nightmares and illness, wilderness and hardship, loss and grief. A love that began when a broken young woman stumbled into a lonely mountain man's camp and found exactly what she needed. A love that created a family, a legacy, a home. A love that proved sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead us to the best things we never knew we were looking for. Katherine had woken screaming every night from the same dream, haunted by loss and trauma. Samuel had held her through every single one, giving her the strength to heal. And in the process, they had both saved each other, building something beautiful and lasting from the ashes of their past pain. Their love story became legend in that part of Texas, passed down through generations. The young couple who met in the wilderness and built an empire of family and love. The mountain man who came down from his solitary existence for the right woman. The survivor who found her strength in the arms of a gentle giant. But for Katherine and Samuel, it was never about legend or legacy. It was simply about love. Pure, fierce, unwavering love that grew stronger with each passing year. Love that began with nightmares, but ended with dreams fulfilled. Love that proved sometimes the most broken people can build the most beautiful lives if they just find the right person to help them put the pieces back together. And so their story ends where it began, in the mountains of Texas, in a cabin built with love, in the arms of the person who made everything make sense. Katherine woke screaming every night from the same dream. Samuel held her through every single one. And together, they built a life beyond their wildest imaginings, a love that would echo through the generations, a legacy that would never be forgotten. The end came gently for both of them, as it should for people who had lived so fully and loved so completely. But their story did not really end. It continues in the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carry their blood and their values. It continues in the house that still stands, in the garden that still blooms each spring, in the stories that are still told around fires on cold winter nights. Katherine and Samuel Crawford, the survivor and the mountain man, the nightmare and the comfort, the lost and the found. Two souls who met in the wilderness and chose each other, again and again, every single day for the rest of their lives. That is what real love looks like. That is what forever means. Their graves stand side by side, two simple markers that barely hint at the incredible story they represent. But those who know, those who carry their legacy, understand what those graves really mark. They mark the resting place of two people who proved that love can heal any wound, that strength comes in many forms, that sometimes the best things in life are found in the most unexpected places. Katherine woke screaming every night from the same dream. Samuel held her through every single one. And in doing so, they created a love story for the ages, a testament to the power of compassion and commitment and choosing each other despite the odds. Their story is one of survival and strength, of building something beautiful from broken pieces, of finding home in another person's arms. And if you listen carefully on quiet nights in those Texas mountains, some say you can still hear echoes of their love. Samuel's deep voice singing old songs, Katherine's laughter ringing through the trees, children playing in the yard, the ghosts of a life well lived, a love well earned, a story well told. This is their legacy. This is their truth. This is the story of how a young woman running from tragedy and a lonely man hiding from his past found each other in the wilderness and built a love that would outlast them both. A love that started with nightmares but ended with every dream fulfilled. A love that proved sometimes the scariest beginnings lead to the happiest endings. Katherine and Samuel. Forever entwined, forever remembered, forever an example of what love can accomplish when two people commit fully to healing each other, supporting each other, and choosing each other through every trial and triumph. Their story is complete now, their circle closed, their love eternal. And that is exactly how it was always meant to be.